I've been asked to address you on some of the legal issues relating to human sexual freedom these days, and there's a lot that I can tell you, and so I've kind of narrowed it down to a couple of things. One of the things that I've been involved in recently is assisting teens who have been caught up in the recent hysteria regarding sexting. My section of the report includes some statistics and descriptions of cases where teenagers have been caught up in the judicial system doing things that normal teenagers do and have been prosecuted by prosecutors and judges and police officers who don't understand either teenagers or technology. And they've been labeled as sex offenders and child pornographers for life. Many of these kids end up on the public sex offender registry for many years, which means their life is over before it even has a chance to begin. Many of you know that the term sexting is a combination of sex and texting, and occurs when somebody sends basically a racy photo of themselves to another person, usually to a romantic partner or somebody that the person wants to be a romantic partner. And these photos are usually sent by cell phones to each other. Now, when adults do this, it's considered harmless flirtation and fun, but when teenagers do this under the age of 18, the law considers it to be child pornography. They get lumped in with the worst child molesters and pedophiles. Now, over 20% of teens have admitted to sending sexting photos to each other. Now, given the natural hesitation that you might expect for a teenager to admit to something like that, I suspect that the real number is much higher. In fact, when I appeared on Good Morning America recently to discuss this issue, they had a group of teenagers sitting there to address sexting and talk about the issue. And when the host asked, how many of you have been involved in sexting, sent or received a picture, a few hands went up, and then the other kids looked around, and a few more hands went up, and the rest of the hands went up at the end because they all realized, yeah, we all have. And this really shouldn't be surprising to anybody. Teenagers communicate digitally more so than verbally these days. And 85% of teenagers have cell phones, and almost all cell phones have cameras. So what do you think our generation would have done with those little cameras if we had them when we were teenagers? Instead, the baby boom generation ran around naked at Woodstock and took Polaroids of each other. But now those same people are parents, and so they've been taught to be appropriately outraged by any mention of teens and sex. That is until their little Johnny or little Jane gets caught up and prosecuted as a pornographer, a child pornographer, for sending a naked picture of themselves. Then the parents finally get it. More and more parents and politicians are starting to catch on and understand that the current law is just not designed to deal with this new phenomenon. One of the teens that I represent in this issue is Philip Alpert. He was convicted of child pornography before I represented him for sending a naked picture of his girlfriend out when he was in high school. Now, absent any change in the law in Florida, he will be a registered sex offender until he is 43 years old. He's 20 now. And that's when he first has a chance to try to get off the sex offender registry. Now, as he'll tell you, try getting a job at all in the current economy, but then try to get a job as a registered sex offender that you have to disclose on your application. Not so easy. Try looking for a place to live when most homeowners associations and condo associations exclude registered sex offenders. Try asking a girl out on a date. Do you tell her in the beginning that you're a registered sex offender, or do you wait till she gets to know you and like you and then drop a bomb on her? It's a no-win situation, and these kids have no idea that what they're doing could possibly be considered such a serious offense. After all, in most states, it's legal for teens to have sex with each other, and in many states, it's legal for certain teens to have sex with adults at anywhere between the age of 13 or 17, and that's a whole other issue. Don't get me started on age of consent, because that has to be addressed at some point. But in most states, a 16-year-old girl can have sex with a 22-year-old man legally. But if she records that activity, it's child pornography. A person has the right to be nude in their house, in their private bedroom. But if that person takes a picture of themselves nude, they have committed child pornography if they're under the age of 18. This is both a state and a federal crime, by the way. So, these kids have gotten caught up in the disconnect between law and technology. And sexting is really one of the only crimes that I can think of where the victim is also the perpetrator. Think about that for a second. Now, we often focus on the rights of adults when we talk about human sexual freedom. And that's because most of us see sexual activity as an adult activity, and for the most part it is. But teenagers are sexual beings as well. They're coming of age and experimenting with their newfound sexuality. People don't become magically sexual when they turn 18, but society likes to pretend that that's the case oftentimes because the reality makes them uncomfortable. The penalties imposed on kids for sexting behavior. 2 states actually have passed legislation. But this is a difficult issue because sexting decriminalization can result in pedophiles possibly using teenagers to exploit a loophole in the law to produce child pornography. Because you can't tell the difference between a picture that is self-produced by a teen and one where a child is abused and forced to engage in sexual activity on camera. The effect on the pedophile is the same. So this is a very difficult issue. I've had an opportunity to draft some model sexting legislation for the Chapel Hill Law School Law Review that's going to be published sometime this fall. And we're hoping that that legislation serves as a basis for other states to look at the issue more closely, not turn half of our kids into registered sex offenders for doing things that kids do nowadays, merely because there's this disconnect between law and technology. All right, so I'll leave that for a second, and the next thing I want to talk to you about is obscenity prosecutions. I do a lot of work in the obscenity field and represent folks that are charged with obscenity. Obscenity is probably the most blatant weapon that the government uses to control and censor sexual expression. It's still astounding to me that in 2010, a free citizen can be prosecuted for making a movie involving consenting adults about somebody's sexual fantasy. But we put people in jail for that very thing. And we're not talking about child pornography, we're not talking about bestiality, we're talking about movies made by consenting adults for consenting adults. But there are people that in 2010 are sitting in federal prison for making a movie. I defended a lady in Pennsylvania who was prosecuted by the federal government for writing a story involving no pictures or real people. I had the opportunity to sit through the Max Hardcore trial in Tampa, Florida, a couple of years ago. That was the first federal obscenity charge brought in my district in, as far back as anybody can remember. So the First Amendment lawyers were pretty interested in, what was going to happen. Admittedly, Max Hardcore's movies are not for everybody. They are fetish type material. But isn't that the point? We all don't have to like the same thing. Human sexual activity is largely a matter of taste. But here we were in Tampa, Florida, the city that supposedly has more adult entertainment per square mile than any other city in the United States of America. And a man was being prosecuted for making a movie about sex. He was dragged from California into Tampa, Florida to defend himself. And he was convicted by the jury and sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for making a movie, the latest casualty of the war on sex. And kudos to Dr. Marty Klein for coining that phrase and writing the book of the same name. So, the lawyers that do this kind of work thought maybe, just maybe, when Barack Obama was elected, this insanity would stop. Many of us, including myself, supported him for that very reason. We had every reason to believe that obscenity prosecutions would stop when a Democrat took office, because that's exactly what happened when Bill Clinton took office in 1992. After the Reagan-Bush era of prosecution against video stores and videotape manufacturers in the adult industry went on for years and years, Bill Clinton put a stop to it. Janet Reno took over the Justice Department. No more obscenity prosecutions were filed. The existing cases were wrapped up, done, 8 years of bliss. So we thought maybe that would happen this time. But our hopes for an end to the obscenity enforcement were quickly dashed. Not only did the existing cases continue, but new investigations were launched and new prosecutions filed. Our firm tends to represent a lot of service providers in the internet industry, like hosts and ISPs and social networking sites and so forth. And so we're usually the first to be made aware of new obscenity cases because the government likes to hit those kind of websites with grand jury subpoenas to find out about people that they want to prosecute. Now, I'm legally constrained and prohibited from telling you any of the details of those investigations, but I can tell you that they exist, they're going on, and new ones are being filed all the time. So, why is Eric Holder, our Attorney General, doing this? Your guess is as good as mine, and maybe he thinks adult entertainment is morally wrong or harmful. Maybe the president told him to do it because he needs to appease some conservative groups. It may just be laziness that since Obama didn't replace the U.S. attorneys throughout the nation and get rid of the obscenity task force prosecutors, it just continued on from the prior administration. But whatever the reason, it's important to remember that people are doing hard time for engaging in erotic expression. And this can simply no longer be tolerated in our current stage of sexual evolution. If you don't like a movie, don't watch it. The only people that are forced to watch obscenity are those people who are on the jury in an obscenity case, and they're dragged there by the prosecution. So the time, in my view, for obscenity laws is over. Just as states were forced to repeal their laws prohibiting houses of ill repute as antiquated and outdated, the scourge of obscenity needs to be put to an end.